I'd like to call a meeting to order. The Board of Leavenworth County Commissioners. I'd like to invite everyone to stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to start with a moment of silence, please. Roll call, start with Commissioner Culbertson.
Here.
Commissioner Smith's present. Commissioner Shemke.
Here.
Commissioner Stevens.
Here.
And Commissioner Cause.
Here.
All commissioners are present. We don't have any public comment today, and we move on to administrative business. Mr. LOUGHRY, you have any administrative business?
Commissioner, I don't have any administrative business today, but I did just want to say that we are going to request a short executive session at the end of the meeting.
Okay. All right. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Does commissioners have anything that needs to be pulled off and voted on separately on the consent agenda? Or any questions or concerns of any item on the consent agenda? Then I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved. Second.
Have a motion and a second on the consent agenda. Is there any further discussion? Voting.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Commissioner Cos votes aye.
Okay. All right. So we're ready to move on to Council on Aging. Carla, how are you today?
Fine. Good morning.
Good morning.
That was a really nice letter that the person wrote on
Yes.
the meals.
Yes.
Almost wants me to try it.
Yes, he does.
I guess
a
I
good
am
job.
old enough.
I'm here for approval and signature of the CARE Act grant for funding for $109,398 for program information assistant, telephone visiting, conduit meals, and homebound.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions of Scarlett on the grant application? Pretty self-explanatory. Then I'll entertain a motion to authorize the chairman to sign an approval of CARES Act grant funding for a total of $109,398.
So moved. Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Voting?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Commissioner Cos votes aye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Scarlett, for doing this.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scarlett.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you.
All right. We're ready for Mr. Knoll.
All right, what we have here today is for your consideration is a resolution. This resolution establishes a maximum speed limit on the roads that were recently hard surfaced as part of the dust abatement program. Currently, county policy has set a speed limit of 35 miles an hour on all unpaved roads. When these roads were hard surfaced, they defaulted back to state statute, so that would be 55 miles an hour, and so therefore this takes it back down to the 35 miles an hour that they were previous to being hard surfaced.
Was this wasn't part of the deficiency review?
No, it was
Prior
not.
to these?
Since
Okay.
there were no roadway improvements, line of sight of driveways, curves, ditches, and
Yeah.
since it was
Yeah.
simply
Well, I knew the warning signs were part of the deficiency review. I didn't know if a
Yep.
regulatory sign would
Yeah,
been
the
part
hill-
of it either.
The Hill Blocks View signs that you'll see out there,
Mhm.
and some of the other signs. There's a few other signs, but no, there was no deficiency. I checked with Mark Brewer with Schlegel and Associates prior to this, and they said it was their intention several years back to carry that speed limit over, but current county policy is pretty specific when it states unpaved.
Okay.
So we're just doing this to clean up the fact that really under current county policy, it defaults to state statute.
Okay. So this was basically necessitated by some citizens
Well, there were
bringing up
citizens-
issues of speed.
Well, we've had a lot of calls about speed on some of the roadways because they are hard surface now, and some of them are fairly long stretches of hard surface that would have been previously gravelled. So we have received a number of calls about speed in a couple different locations, but it was really just part of the project too that was intended to be 35 miles an hour from previous staff years ago, and so in order to post any speed limits in specific areas, we're not going to go out and post all of these roadways, but if there are specific areas where that's desired or needed, this allows us to do that in response to some concerns.
I know I got some calls on 219th Street.
219th Street, we've got some calls on Loring Road down south, a couple other long stretches.
But you get calls on gravel roads, people
All the
speeding too.
time. Yeah. Yeah.
More so now with the dust.
Yep, and we've gotten a lot of calls about how these dust abatement roadways have changed traffic patterns. People are taking the shortest route to a hard surface roadway, and in several cases in the county, people are taking roadways that they wouldn't have previously taken because it gets them out to blacktop much faster. And so as a result of paving these roads, it has affected the traffic patterns around the immediate areas.
I think we anticipated
That's why we
that.
build roads.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
we
people use
anticipated
them.
that when we did it, yeah.
So, any questions on the resolution? I'll entertain a motion then. On resolution 2020-38, maximum speed limits on dust abatement roadways.
Move that we approve resolution 2020-38, setting maximum speed limit, dust abatement roadways.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the resolution? And voting?
Aye.
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 Commissioner Cox votes aye.
Thank
Bill,
you.
is the default from your department to say call the sheriff? He's the one that deals with speed.
A lot of times it's enforcement. I mean, I think it's been proven that posting a sign is not going to change traffic patterns.
Really?
Come on.
You mean putting a deer crossing sign up doesn't allow a deer to cross there?
Yeah, that means the deer's crossing at the sign.
Right,
It's
right,
like
right.
school crossing sign. No, it's an enforcement. So we'll, a lot of times we'll stick out, in a couple cases here recently, we've put out traffic counters.
The radar counter?
Radar counters to see what the speed that's being traveled is. And a lot of times you find that it's not nearly as fast as what's being reported.
Get out of town.
And the larger the vehicle, the faster it looks like it's moving. I've found that to be very true.
Mm-hmm. Well, as dry as it is now on the gravel roads, I'm sure everybody's got a lot of dust issues right now.
We need some rain.
So, anyways.
All right.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bill.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
All right.
Thank you, Bill.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. We are ready for the Port Authority recommendation for economic development funds. Mr. Cause, you taking that?
So, yeah, quick.
Short straws.
All right.
Yes.
How are you today?
Just real quick history, most of you are familiar. When the county authorized a grant to the city of Tonganoxie to complete the Tonganoxie Industrial Park, the grant was for $5 million. It stated in that grant all of the funds that were granted had to be used within the limits of the park, which they were. Tonganoxie was very frugal with their money. They had excellent bids. Bids came in under what their engineers' estimates were. At the end of the day, they had $1.7 million left over out of the $5 million. In accordance with the agreement, that money was to come back to the county since it could not be spent inside the industrial park. The city of Tonganoxie then proposed to use some of that money to make improvements outside of the park, but improvements that would help serve the park, i.e. mainly sewer line. After discussion at the county commission level, the commissioners requested a recommendation from the Port Authority on how this money should be spent. All of the Port Authority members listened to the transcripts from the commission meeting to try to understand exactly what you guys were asking for. After that point, it's our understanding that the funds would not just be limited to the city of Tonganoxie, that if something county-wide was appropriate, those funds could be used in another area. With that thought in mind, we did request from all of the cities any projects that they had that they would like to be considered for this funding. All of the cities responded with kind of their wish list or what they would do with the money if they had it. In addition to that list that was provided in your packet, there was one more request made from Commissioner Culbertson to improve County Road 30 from Route 92 south to, I believe, Hollingsworth Road. That is a gravel road now. He felt improving that would provide better north-south access to the northwest portion of the county. As they could go due south, tie into K-16, Tonganoxie, and eventually to the Turnpike or 2440. All these projects were laid out, presented to the members of the Port Authority at the September meeting. After discussion, the consensus was that we started to invest money in the Tonganoxie Business Park or Industrial Park. Now is probably not the time to walk away and leave a park that's 85% done. That we need to have a completed park that a business is ready to move into, shovel-ready, utilities, water, sewer, electric, gas, basically where they can come in and hook on and go to work and could actually start turning dirt in less than 90 days. With that thought in mind, we knew the sewer line was out there. It was on their list. And that's extending a trunk line from within the city of Tonganoxie to the industrial park. Currently, there is sewer in the industrial park, but it runs to a manhole off 222nd Street. The road that runs along the north side there, and then it ends. So it doesn't go anywhere. The current user is using a holding facility that is pumped out occasionally because they just have a single bathroom, I believe. Obviously, if we're going to get any type of larger user in there, we have to have sewer service to the park. I had a lot of concerns over the water service to the park, with the idea that if you put in 100,000, 150,000 square foot building, by code, the building is going to have to be sprinkled. And although there is a 12-inch water line that feeds into the park, it's fed by a 6-inch water line from the city of Tonganoxie. My concern was that a 6-inch water line was not sufficient to sprinkle a 100,000 square foot building. So I talked to a gentleman from Continental Fire Sprinklers out of St. Joe, and I probably had an hour conversation with him on, what do you need, what's typical, and what he said was, it depends a lot on what's going to be in the building. If you're going to have highly combustible stuff, you need more fire protection, but if you're going to store bricks, something that won't burn. He said what they're seeing, though, is a lot of the buildings are going vertical instead of going horizontal. So instead of a ceiling height of 24 foot, you may see a ceiling height of 40 to 50 foot because they'll just start stacking their inventory higher. That causes problems for fire sprinklers because all the sprinklers sprinkle from the roof. So it means you got to push that water that much farther, that much higher. Therefore, you need more pressure to do that. He said pressure probably is not as big as item as capacity. Most of what he's seen is fire sprinkler systems need somewhere in the range of 1,000 to 1,500 gallons per minute capacity. He says most of the city systems are more in the 2,000 to 2,500 gallon per minute range. He said you can put pumps on there and you can start sucking the water, but if you get below a certain PSI in your water line, you could cause a negative pressure and you could actually suck groundwater or something into your water line and contaminate your water system. So if you don't have water service, the solution is some type of a holding tank or a fire tank. He says those can be very expensive depending on how much you need. There's several types. They can be underground, a buried tank, but to have a capacity of over 100,000 gallons of water is not out of line. If you have something that is above ground, then you need to be concerned about how you're going to heat it in the winter to keep it from freezing. Obviously, there's maintenance associated with any of those tanks. So the water is not a hard set number. Unfortunately, right now, the way the park sits, we have a capacity of about 600 gallons a minute, which by pretty much anybody's standards probably will not be enough water to sprinkle a building. I talked with Brian Kingsley, who is the city's engineer, and after conversations with him, he fell in line with what the fire sprinkler people said too. Now, he brought some issues up that I hadn't considered, but he's totally correct, is that if you run a 12-inch line out to that industrial park and you have no users on it, you run into problems with stagnant water because that water's not moving. There's no uses for it. And you're talking, 12-inch line, you're talking tens of thousands of gallons that is stored in that line. And so in order to keep it fresh, normally you'd have a loop system that it would circulate on its own. Well, this is going to be a dead system, so there is no loop. So you would have to go out there and every week blow it off or something, blow 10,000 gallons of water off of it. But he said there might be some inventive ways that we could come up with a way to circulate it and take care of that. But until you actually get a user on there that's using that much water and can keep it circulating, you're going to have to address the stagnant issue. He has done planning for the city of Tonganoxie. He provided several options for water lines. Basically, however much money they wanted to spend. The one that provides over 2,000 gallons a minute of capacity to the industrial park, he had estimated the cost at $600,000 if it was contracted out. He says, I feel like that cost could be down around $200,000 if the city staff put it in, assuming cities, you don't count anything for their time or their equipment, and you're going to pay them anyway, which I don't agree with that, but I know that's how people look at things. So somewhere between the $200,000 to $600,000 for the water. The Port Authority members felt that it was very important to get the sewer and to make provisions for the water. I know there has been some discussion of tying into another water system that runs adjacent to it. I think that's an option. I understand Tonganoxie's concern that they want to have control over the utility for someone that comes in there. They have the water system throughout their city limits. This would be an exception to that. And I think the Port Authority felt that we didn't really want to get into that, but what we wanted was both of them done. And to be honest, we really don't care how you do it as long as it gets done. So the long story short was the Port Authority's recommendation was to issue a grant of $1.2 million to Tonganoxie with the idea that the sewer system would be completed and the water system would be completed. And if you want to use the 1.2 all for the sewer and pay for the water yourself, or if you want to go work out something with the other water district and save yourself $200,000 or $300,000, that's Tonganoxie's call. It's their system, it's their park. We just want it done. So that's the $1.2 million is the Port Authority's recommendation. It's not limited just to sewer, or water. It's to get them both done however they can do in their best interest. There was a lot of good projects that were submitted by the cities, and in that light, we're not saying that we're not interested in any of those or we're not going to do them. We feel they all have merit. We want to get Tonganoxie completed. We still have $500,000 left out of the 1.7. We're going to go back and look at some of those projects and see if they look feasible. And at some point in the future, we may come back to you guys and say, hey, this project looks like it's feasible. We want some help from you guys, i.e. funding. Don't know if that's going to happen, but we're going to evaluate them. We are going through kind of a process of what the purpose of the Port Authority, what their goals are, what they're trying to be accomplished. We're going to also we're doing a study session on that. We're going to do a study session on spec buildings because there's been a lot of interest in people wanting to start doing spec buildings again. So it's something that we're going to study and look at. So the Port Authority's been very busy. We're trying to get stuff accomplished. We're not just sitting on our heels not doing anything. This funding has taken a lot of time. We've gone through it fairly meticulously, spent a lot of time on it, and feel that we have a solution. It appears Tonganoxie is happy with the solution so far. That's about all I have. If you have any questions for me, I'd be glad to answer them. There's representatives from the City of Tonganoxie or Steve Jack from the Port Authority.
You may not be able to answer this question, but the brewer system, is it also, like, talk about the stagnant water issue, is that an issue for them, or do they have a looped system?
I assume it's looped, but I don't know that for sure.
There's a 24-inch main right there by the industrial park with a 1.5 million gallon storage up on top of a hill. I think that would answer any pressure problems.
And if it's just a pressure problem, they can put a fire pump on and boost the pressure. So if they get a building that's real tall and you lose your pressure, you can put a fire pump on it. You just don't want to draw in there.
So even if we did this, if Tonganoxie did their line extension, if there was some industry that came in and needed a large volume of water, we have another source there, so there's a lot of water available.
Yes, sir. Correct.
Well, any other questions, Mr. Cause?
No, I mean, I'm always curious how, after a project, deficiencies are found, after the fact. I mean, at what point that should have been caught or probably addressed as a part of the project is not on the Port Authority or anybody else. Just kind of curious how it got to that point. My big thing is, never been whether or not Tonganoxie's been great stewards of the money, because clearly they were.
They have.
And they should get tons of recognition for it. It was our theory or thinking to never leave something 85% complete. The understanding was the City of Tonganoxie had a plan all along to extend services and had funding identified, or at least a strategy to complete it. So I don't blame them for wanting to use this money. I'd want to do the very same thing if I were them, and they've worked with the Port Authority to get it done. And I wouldn't want to go back on our decision to allow the Port Authority to be good stewards and look at all the projects and figure out what's best. I would only ask one question, is that the Leavenworth Park has all of the infrastructure and then some, and we've still not seen the activity. So I don't know that if it were going to take longer to complete for the City of Tonganoxie, that that's the reason we can't get something built, is because those services aren't there. That would just be my only argument or caveat to it. Not that I'm against this. I'm totally in support of the Port Authority and their decisions, and working with the City of Tonganoxie, just asking those questions I think are always worthwhile. As to, we've got parks with infrastructure that still don't have product, and I agree there's several submittals that talk about that very fact, that we don't have the inventory and businesses are looking for existing buildings, and we don't typically have what they're asking for. So that's a problem too. But it doesn't do any good to build a building if you don't have the infrastructure to support it. So
right.
I understand.
Is there any prospect, and maybe this is LCDC too, do we have any immediate prospect of another tenant coming into the Tonganoxie Business Park?
I'll let Steve address that. He deals with that on a day-to-day basis.
Well, we have we continue to submit for projects that we hear from the Kansas Department of Commerce and the Kansas City Area Development Council. So there are several pending projects, but we haven't gotten to the point where they've asked how much water, how much sewer, what's the gas. So we continue to throw our hat in the ring and see what happens. What we have also done is had discussions with various major developers in the Kansas City region. And the last one, Occidental, that was there just a couple weeks ago, when we toured both the Leavenworth site and the Tonganoxie site, pointed out some of those deficiencies. And what I'd really like to do, and I think what George would like to do, is to get somebody else to build a large spec building, whether it's Van Trust or Occidental or any of the major players, North Point in the Kansas City area, to spend money on a 100,000, 200,000 square foot building. And those developers are a little gun shy because not all the utilities are in. So the more, obviously, the more the public sector invests in an asset, then it makes more, it's more valuable to the private sector to come in and to go for it.
When I first came on to this board, it's been 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, you gave a talk to us, I think it was in a work session, and you said that typically economic development, you want X size certain size of business up to X comes in every 12 months, and then every 18 months you would get a more substantial size business in. And of course, I've been here now 18 months, and we haven't seen anything like that.
Well, I would respectfully point out that there is a business in the Tonganoxie Business Park that people continually say is empty. And I think it's and I'm not, this is not to you, but it's to some other things I've read on social media. It's not an empty park. And there is a company out of Toronto, Aurora, Illinois, Unilock, that is there on 16 acres, that has signed a development agreement with the city of Tonganoxie. So in the next 18 to 36 months, they have promised to build an office space behind their showroom, where it is now, and then a 60,000, 70,000 square foot manufacturing facility. And then long-term plans are for a second manufacturing facility of 70,000 square feet on those 34 acres. And so that development project is going to take time. When Nathan McCommon, the previous city administrator, and I talked to him a lot, and they showed us what they had in Aurora, Illinois, and 100 employees, and 2 or 3 manufacturing facilities on 40 acres. We said, well, we want that. And they said that took 28 years. We're a conservative company. So we have a company there, and they can't build the manufacturing part of it unless they get the sewer and the water to a certain level. So we still have 18 to 36 months. Is that about right, George? Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're. I think everybody here is supportive of getting there on as far as the infrastructure. But what I'm saying is, we had Unilock when I came on the commission. When you gave your speech, we were talking about other.
Unilock was there when I came on the commission. They were downtown.
So what? When you gave your speech, said every 18 months we would have a larger entity. So I'm just pressing that a little bit. And I know we've had this pandemic and we've had all these other things happen, but I think we want to see some real economic development progress.
Right, and it's helpful when the utilities are in the ground.
But you're advertising the utilities are in place on your website.
Well, the utilities are in the ground. They're just not hooked up. Or there are certain levels of
okay.
There are some companies.
All right, I get the blue smoke and mirrors.
I know. I'm trying to market it.
Yeah, it's marketing, Doug.
Yeah, it's marketing. Okay. Can't dazzle you with facts, we'll baffle you with bull.
This sewer is important that we get this
It's
done.
very important. The sewer is very important. The water to me is, you got a 24-inch water line right there, different water company. It's actually a private company, so it's another business that could be considered going into the park.
And maybe George could
Selling
address what Tonganoxie's position is on that.
Morning. George Bradford, City Manager, Tonganoxie. Thank you again for the opportunity to talk about this. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the Port Authority and thank them for the fair process I think that they laid out over the last 3 or 4 months of submitting requests to them as a board for review, and I would say the very professional manner in which they followed up. I can only speak for the City of Tonganoxie, but they had very pointed questions that I think hopefully led to them feeling comfortable with the decision and recommendation they're making to you today. I'd also be remiss, though, if I didn't talk about the investment the City of Tonganoxie's already made towards the business park and the infrastructure that's been put in place. So to that end, obviously the city bought the property in 2009. We didn't use any of the county grant to offset any of the debt the city's carrying to purchase the property. And when we first started the project, we had an estimate of just under $6 million from the engineers to do the scope of services we had originally talked about. So we were beneficiaries of very competitive bidding, and ultimately, not only did we have enough money to complete the entire scope, we had that balance of funds. But even before those funds were made available in 2017, the city in 2011 started the process of designing water lines to service the park. So there were also other projects happening along the way, like the U.S. Army Reserve, and so the city had to run water service to them. They just happened to be on the other side of 2440 of where the business park is. But
didn't the person that sold the property pay for the water line to be run there?
They helped pay for a portion of it. So the city, though, when they bored back under 2440, the city did invest in a larger sleeve so that if we ever went and switched out the water line to a larger size, it could accommodate for a larger size water line. But in addition to that water line, and that's the current service to the park, it's about 500-600 gallons per minute when we test it. It's 50 psi, and it's more than adequate. I mean, our current user there uses about what average residential water user does. And Greg did a great job of talking about the problem of stagnation in the water line and having to bleed out thousands of gallons of water because you don't have a user. But there was a plan that was outlined. It actually has 2 other options to run a service line to the business park from the water tower over by the school campuses. And so those have always been in place. It's just been a kind of a chicken and egg, right? Like the other utility companies. They're ready to make a larger investment, but they're poised to do that when they have a better understanding of what the end user is. And so if you don't need a huge natural gas line running to the park because you don't have a huge natural gas user, why would you put that in before that use comes in? The other key component is just a scheduling timeline deal. The city's already invested. We've purchased the easement. We've paid for the soft design, preferred alignment for the interceptor sanitary sewer line to come to the business park. So from a timeline perspective, even if we sold a lot or worked out a development agreement with one of the firms that are interested in Tonganoxie Business Park, and again, primarily, it's the only park in Leavenworth County that has nearly direct access to I-70. I mean, it's 2.5 miles. It takes less than 3 minutes to get from I-70 to the park. There's no other industrial business park in Leavenworth County that has that, and that's why there's interest from those large development firms, some of which I've worked with in Kansas City, and that is the selling point. But again, setting all of that aside, the infrastructure that we put inside the park, we ran the sewer line all the way to the southwest corner of the park. And based on our water treatment plant's capacity, we feel like that can service a lot of the County Road 1 corridor. And one of the things that the Port Authority asked for is for the city engineer to estimate how many additional acres of development ground could be put into it. And I think we settled on 1,000 acres or so based on a mix of commercial and residential product and based on what we still have left in the capacity of the city's water treatment plant. So hopefully I didn't veer too far off from your original question, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to say, look, there's been a lot of investment. And sometimes development is, when you put all these things in place, and it's still no guarantee that somebody will come there, but based on the marketing, based on the investments that have been made, we still feel that it's probably the best option in Leavenworth County in terms of where someone would want to come make that type of investment. And then couple that with the labor shed study that's been recently completed as well, I think it supports that the labor numbers are there to, again, showing that Tonganoxie is the best option. So.
I agree.
Commissioner, all that, did I answer your question?
Fair enough.
One thing I might add, too, is we still have two things hanging out on the park. One is the gas service, and we've been in conversation with Kansas Gas. Again, Kansas Gas wants to know what the load's going to be. Well, we don't know. But a lot of times, I know Kansas Gas did this with us on the asphalt plant, is they will put their line in at a reduced cost if you guarantee a certain usage over the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. And it really reduces the cost. And it makes sense. It's a cost benefit to them. Sure. They're going to put infrastructure in, they get something back. So probably in the best interest, and gas line doesn't take a long time to put in. It's not a 12-month process. So I think we kind of felt like let's hold up on that. There is gas for heating right now, but if we get something big, we can move on that. The other issue is the road there. Right now it's in good shape, but if you were to put some type of distribution and have a lot of truck traffic, the road would probably have to at least be widened, an improved shoulder put on or something like that. Again, though, that's something that can be done relatively quickly. There's also a possibility of some KDOT funds for that if we were to do that. Mm-hmm. So we've kind of held off on those two things, but I want you guys to understand they're still out there.
Be nice to get the access back at Kansas Avenue to 24 Highway.
And I think you made a good point, Greg, that those two things could happen pretty quick. It's a lot different than a sewer line and a water line.
Right. So. I think the water line can happen real quick.
Well, yeah, there's some.
Probably by the end of the day.
Yeah. And have you guys talked to them about that? This has been something that's been talked about for 20 years.
Sure. I think that private utility company has made presentations to the city in the past. I guess that's on one side. On the other side is the city is a water provider. This is a piece of property within city limits that the city owns. And so I guess to remain fair and balanced with our utility structure as far as our utility rates go and our users, we feel that,
where does the city get their water from?
We have wells and we buy some from BPU. We have a transmission line that the city put in.
Isn't BPU your main provider, though?
It, in the past, has been closer to 50-50. But here recently, with our new growth, we're shifting a little bit more to BPU reliance. I mean the wells are over 100 years old, and I'm sure they did great for Tonganoxie when it had
sure, but that's kind of my point, though. You're already using a different company for water, so this wouldn't be any different. I don't see anything wrong with using two different companies for water.
Yeah, well, with BPU though, we've invested with them in the transmission lines, and so ultimately we are passing that on. It's not like handing off a project to a different private utility so that they can collect revenue on that.
If we just amended this and said that we would pay for the sewer lines with the city itself, go ahead with the water lines.
I mean, that's always been in the city's plans once we have a user available. And again, going back to the timeline issue, for the sewer, with the easement and the preferred alignment and all of that stuff already knocked out, if we get a 200,000 square foot spec building, we're going to outpace that spec building going up. That's going to take 9 to 12 months. It's going to take us 4 to 6 months to do the sewer line, and probably less than that.
But if the county, if we just amended this and said the entire amount goes to the sewer lines, you would still, as a city, your intention would be that you are going to build a water line.
Yes. I mean, the interceptor sewer line has always been the city's #1 priority. It's the only thing we've ever had a cost for, where we need to get that project moving before the end of the year.
And my point was, you guys, City of Tonganoxie's had a plan to complete it with or without the project coming in under budget. This just helps accelerate it. Because if the project would have came in at $6 million or $5.1 million instead of $3.3 million, you still would have had to solve for it. So you guys the entire time have had a plan to do it. This hopefully helps accelerate it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, it would be beneficial to us, yes.
Sure. No, I'm on the same page. And I think, the Port Authority take a good stance of not getting in the middle of that utility.
So
well done.
Would the county be holding the money until these projects are done and then pay out on them? Would that be?
Commissioners, it's always my recommendation that we hold the money and reimburse as they need it. That was my recommendation on the previous time, and it's be my recommendation now that if we authorize the expenditure of these funds for what's being proposed, that we hold the money until such time as the funds are actually needed to complete the project.
Okay.
How has the Port Authority in the past, whether it's a spec program or anything else, released those funds? Has the process been to just reimburse as expenses were paid and submitted, or has the Port Authority generally put those funds out there ahead of the expenses actually being incurred?
I don't know that we haven't done anything similar to this as the Port Authority, because by statute we can't do it since they're sales tax funds. In the past, though, any incentives have been done more as the process goes on, to where the funds are protected, where someone couldn't take the funds and not do what they say.
So they're allocated. They're bookmarked, but then they're provided as needed as expenses are incurred.
Right.
And we can earn the interest on the money.
Is that how the city of Tonganoxie, you're good with the distribution?
Yeah, I would definitely like to have a better understanding of that, and maybe I can work with Mr. LOUGHRY and Mr. Van Paris on some sort of agreement. I could see a scenario maybe where the city would have to issue temp notes to get this project going, but before we move to permanent financing, these funds are made available. So, but we probably need to get the city's financial advisors and a few bond attorneys involved in that discussion to make sure it works for both parties. But again, a long-winded answer to say I think we could probably find a way.
Let's keep as many attorneys out of it as we can.
I think what I would anticipate, George, would be more of like a direct reimbursement where you enter into an agreement with a firm and then we just pay that. So you wouldn't need that temporary financing. There's no reason to have issuance costs if we don't need to. So.
Wonderful. Even better. Good idea, Mark.
Okay.
But we would anticipate, we've had these discussions with both our city engineer as well as our financial advisors that we've got to get this thing going before the end of the year, so we're ahead of the spring schedule. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, George. Mr. Cos, was what you'd mentioned earlier about County Road 30, was it vetted through the Port Authority, or was this just a come late?
It was discussed through the Port Authority.
Okay. And any thoughts?
It's still hanging out there.
Okay.
I think my feeling is we need to get a better feel of what the goal of the Port Authority is, what type of projects we're interested in. We've had a lot of requests for retail. In the past, we haven't normally done retail. County Road 30 is something that we haven't done in the past. Those types of projects. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I think we need to go back to, there's a paragraph in the agreement for the Port Authority and the county that was signed a year ago. I think we need to go back for that, and I'd like to vet that out a little better, what our our purpose is and what types of projects we should be looking at and what types of projects we shouldn't be looking at, and try to narrow it down instead of the shotgun approach.
Right, and I think this is what you did recently here with this. I think this is what the Port Authority's for. And I want to thank you and everybody on the Port Authority for doing this, because, this is better than just us doing it.
Well, Steve put a lot of time in this, and he's done a good job putting this all together for everybody and laying it out in a form that could be interpreted. So he's put a lot of time into it.
And I know the Port Authority members, they put in a lot of time other than just going to the meetings. I know. I talked to Vernon quite a bit. I know he puts in a lot of time.
He does. He's a good member.
So, any other questions, Mr. Cause? Anything on Port Authority or Tonganoxie?
No, I'd say, keep up the great work. I love the fact that the cities are engaging directly and coming up with projects. I think some are more realistic and viable than others, but I think in the past we kind of struggled with that collaboration that's desperately needed for the county to help the cities grow and vice versa. So I think it's great. Just keep it up and let us know what you need.
Okay, thank you. It was a unanimous vote, too.
Okay.
So no one voted against this.
Okay, sounds good.
George, thank you. You and your staff, and Steve, of course.
All right.
Great job.
Yep, council members. Okay. All right, do we have any further discussion on the development funds?
So does any
Economic
kind of
development funds.
motion need to be made to support the request of the Port Authority?
Yes, I think if you could provide a motion today, or just so that staff would understand what the direction is, because there was conversation about water line, no water line, sewer, so that if you are allocating these funds, the full $1.2 million, that the motion would be something along the lines of you allocate the $1.2 million towards the Tonganoxie Industrial Park improvements to include water and sewer, off-site water and sewer improvements.
So I'd like to make a motion to approve the economic development funding to the city of Tonganoxie for $1.2 million for the improvements to the industrial park.
For the water and sewer infrastructure?
Water and sewer infrastructure.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the water and sewer? Voting. Aye.
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 Commissioner Cobb votes aye.
Commissioners, will develop any kind of agreement that George and the city of Tonganoxie will feel comfortable with, and bring it back. Then you'd have to both parties would have to approve that. So, but we can get that done.
I had to struggle voting for the water line. When there's water that close, but with the Port Authority's recommendation, I really do wish Tonganoxie would look at hooking on to that 24-inch main there to provide water to the park instead of using all the taxpayers' money to build a water line. It's going to be double infrastructure out there.
And the one good thing that we discussed was that if we get a lot of industry out there, which that's what we hope, we'll have plenty of water.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks,
Thank you.
like I said, thanks everybody on the Port Authority for going through this and vetting all these projects. I wish we had more money to provide for more projects, but we have limited funds. But like I said, I want to thank Tonganoxie too for being good stewards of the money and developing the park and not spending the whole $5 million inside the park when it wasn't necessary. And like I said, we're just ready to come out to some ribbon cuttings. Do I need to sharpen the scissors? We're getting a little rusty, Steve. So, all right, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Do we have a big pair? I've not seen it.
He's got it.
It's a knife.
Behave. All right. Do we have any any other business for us this time? Then I'll entertain a motion to go into executive. Or do you have any other business? Okay, then I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session.
This is Commissioner Cobb. Can I just interject one thing before we go into executive session?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. I just want to remind everyone that early voting begins today and that the advance ballots are being mailed today. So get out there and vote.
And with that being said, also the census ends today or tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. The census, the last day to do the census is tomorrow, and encourage anyone who hasn't done the census to please do so. And also, like Commissioner Cause says, early voting has begun. And mail-in ballots will be mailed out. They're mailed out now.
Today.
And get them turned back in as soon as possible.
On this, the small cities, I know Commissioner Culbertson's met with Easton. I met with the Linwood City Council. The deadlines for submission by the cities is November 1st. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. LOUGHRY, but the deadline for them to get the grant funds submitted is December 1st. Is that correct?
Yeah, Commissioners, I think that pretty much has to be the deadline for the funding, because we have to have the check written by the 15th of December in order to give us time to reallocate any funds that would be left over. So I think I'd like to give them as much time as possible on these things, but I think December 1st really is the deadline we need to have for any of these requests for funds to come in so we can get the checks written by then.
And that's also the townships.
Be the townships.
Townships and cities.
Any of the grants that we have out there. The November 1st is their deadline to let us know what they're going to use the funds on, but by December 1st they need to have the funds pretty much allocated out and spent so that we can get checks written.
And any projects that they're doing have to be done by the 15th.
Any of the projects have to be done.
Completed.
Yep. So, again, it's just that we have to have everything done by the 30th. And if for whatever reason some of these agencies waited until the 15th to say, oops, we're not going to be able to use all of our funds, then we have basically 15 days calendar, not work days, to reallocate those funds for other purposes, or we send it back to the state. So we want to avoid that if we can.
Okay, one additional question on I know a couple of weeks ago we asked on County Road 1 whether if we went ahead with the zoning, whether the current zoning proposal or amended zoning proposal, if notification letters would have to be resent out. And you were going to give us a ruling on that.
Short answer is yes. I think you would need to notice up any proposed changes to the original rezoning plan, as well as conduct the required public hearing before this board, Planning Commission. In any event, I think it would require a renotice.
So maybe sticking with the land use plan might be just as.
Commissioners, it's your call. As I mentioned at the earlier meeting, if the renotice is a barrier, it's a publication in your official newspaper. It's the mailing of notice out, which is the number of notices by 50 cents. So it's really not a barrier. I would suggest the real issue might be a consensus on the part of the board as to what proposal to put before the citizens.
We'll be discussing all this on the comp plan coming up on the 28th, I believe.
Now, does that include if we just stayed with the plan that had already been noticed, we would still need to do a renotice?
No.
I don't believe you would, but
I think it already passed.
I think the issue is,
right.
First of all, it's been a great deal of time since that notice was provided.
I think that, one, the land use plan's already adopted. We've already approved that. You're just discussing the rezoning, the actual rezoning to mimic what the land use plan said is going to go on down there. And I do think on that one, because we did not conduct the public hearing on the day it actually was on the agenda, that we probably would have to renotice regardless of what you do, whether you amend it or whether you adopt it as presented. I think you probably should renotice, because it's like Mr. Van Fair said, it's been a long time since we did that, and we did not conduct the public hearing the date we tabled it. So, and we did not table it to a date certain.
And Commissioners, on this type of an issue, as much as you're affecting the potential use of that land for decades to come, if an additional period of 30 to 60, even 90 days is required, it would be time well spent. One, to give this board time to weigh in on the matter, as well as provide notice to the public.
It seems like to me, I mean, these people have been notified at meetings after meetings after meetings, and now we're going to say we're going to have to re-notify them and go through this whole process again. I'm okay with just leaving the land use plan and just leaving it that way.
Well, that's what happens when you spend $25 million in an area. I mean, you got to go through some hearings and public notices and all that. Because
we kind of dropped the ball on this because we had already sent out a letter.
I think that the conversation at the time was to wait until the comp plan was done before you rezoned it, and then we'd do the rezoning after the comp plan. So that's why it was delayed.
Correct.
It's just too bad that we have to do the whole
I know.
thing again.
You spend $25 million up at Easton, you wouldn't mind a few letters being sent out, would you?
Yeah.
Well, with all the development that's coming in, just rushing in down there, I don't see that there's a real need to just rush into rezoning it because the businesses aren't just flocking right down there.
Yeah.
What does Unilock have, 4 employees?
I mean, yeah, you're right. That's an awful lot of money we spent. The county spent.
The county spent. The taxpayers, the people in Easton and Linwood help pay for it.
It's a building that pays property tax. That's good enough for me.
Yeah.
I see one more that doesn't pay property tax.
There you go.
Boy, oh boy, get an earful.
Some more.
If leads and prospects increase the tax
All right,
rate,
Jeff, you want me to?
it'll be good.
Does anybody else got anything? Or are we ready for the
All right.
executive session motion?
Yes, sir.
I move that the board recess for a closed executive meeting for the discussion of a subject involving the legal interests of the county as justified by KSA 75-431B2 for consultation with legal counsel for the board, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship, and that the board resume open meeting at...
Commissioner Shimke, I'd like to suggest 5 minutes, but I'll suggest 15.
Right. At 10:15 a.m. in the meeting room of the board. Present in the executive meeting will be Commissioners Culbertson, Cause, Shimke, Smith, STIEBEN, Senior County Councilor David Van Paris, and County Administrator Mark Loughrey.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the executive session? Voting? Aye.
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 Aye. Commissioner Cox, aye.
I'll let the record show that we've returned to regular session from executive session. No decisions were made. The discussion was limited to legal interest of the county. Is there any other business for the board before we adjourn? Then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Voting?
Aye.
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 We're adjourned. All right.